Well, Michigan State pulled off a massive win over number 4 Kentucky in double overtime to tip off the Champions Classic on Tuesday. It is clear that Tom Izzo's squad was seriously underappreciated heading into the season.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is up? Welcome to the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Andy Patton, and today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, 5 days after losing by just 1 point to Gonzaga aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, the Michigan State Spartans took John Calipari's Kentucky Wildcats to double overtime before pulling off a victory. Matt Sheehan of Locked On Spartans joins me today. Matt, after watching Michigan State this past week and watching them today, first of all, I hope that everything is okay with your heart and the heart of the fan base in Michigan State. But I just got to ask, this team sure looks like one of the 25 best teams in the country, don't they?
Right, doesn't it? And I was the mopiest little zoo lion after what happened Friday in the aircraft carrier. 12-point lead in the second half against the number 2 ranked Gonzaga squad. And look, there was a faction of our fan base that was like, hey, yeah, we lost, but I'm pretty happy. We look pretty good. I wish I was in that faction. I was not. I was actually devastated that we lost that game. More devastated than I've been in a November game since the 2005 Maui Invitational game when we played Gonzaga. Yeah. No one else is going to remember that, but I was devastated because I thought we're not going to have a lot of these chances in this gauntlet of a season to have an opportunity to beat a top 5 team like this. Because I was honestly kind of chalking up a loss in the Champions Classic. Kentucky's really good.
Yeah.
But boy, do I look at Friday a lot different. I'm looking at it like everyone else was. That, hey, this is a team that can hang with top 5 teams in the country because, well, they just did it 2 times in a row. Didn't seem like it was much of a fluke. And, well, this time, thank God, pulled out the win, which is always fun to do. So, yeah, this is a top 25 team, maybe top 15 if I'm really feeling myself right now, which kind of. So
yeah, I'm with you 100%, Matt. I think there's a top 15 team in the country. I think you look at, Gonzaga and North Carolina are still on the top spots. North Carolina hasn't looked great in their games, but there's no reason to move them off that spot. We'll certainly see how Gonzaga handles Kentucky when they play them on Sunday. Houston obviously is right in that conversation. There's Baylor and Kansas and Duke and every, a lot of other teams kind of right in that bunched up there. But after that, I don't think there are any teams that I would conclusively put ahead of Michigan State after that top 6 or 7 teams. And I mean, out of those top 6 or 7 teams, Michigan State beat one of them and they came 1 possession away from beating another one. So to me, we know Tom Izzo can coach. We know that he gets the most out of teams that maybe don't have on paper the talent that you would expect a top 10 or top 5 or top 15 team to have. But so far through the first couple of games this season, it is really hard to not say that Michigan State is one of the 10 or 15 best teams in the entire country.
Yeah, and I get why Michigan State was unranked, no doubt about it. They kind of, I guess not limped into the tournament last year, but they did cut it somewhat a little close, but they definitely limped in the year before that. So that's back-to-back years. And honestly, how many times do we hear it on the broadcast tonight that, well, this Michigan State team doesn't have a superstar?
Yep.
And that's still valid. We're still figuring out who our go-to guy is going to be late in the game. But, man, if it can be by committee with Joey Hauser, who is the human form of cryptocurrency, he's either going to have this incredible game and think oh my God, late first round draft pick, or he's going to have a game where it's why isn't he just working on enterprise right now? So it's crazy. But Joey Hauser tonight was the MVP for Michigan State, I think. And then you have AJ Hogarth, of course, Tyson Walker, a lot to be said about them, Jaden Akins, but holy crap. I talked about it on my podcast. I can't think of another guy in Michigan State history. And honestly, you could pull out maybe not a ton of examples from college basketball history of guys that have taken a 1-year leap that Mady Sissoko has. And I know We're 3 games into the season. I get it. But look, we're talking about a guy who averaged 4.5 minutes per game last year, 1.1 points. And that was after his sophomore year. You know, it's not like he was behind this stud center and barely got playing time. Like, oh no, he was supposed to be good last year. And it was just a slow process. And it's like, well, now we got to pray that this guy is serviceable. How about a superhero? Like he's looked, it is a small sample size. It is 3 games, but man, everything that happened on the carrier, him getting boards, ripping down dunks, like it didn't look fluky after today. And he looked, I'm not going to, I'm emotional. I'm very passionate right now. I'm not going to go crazy and say he looked just as good as Oscar Tshiebwe, but like he held his own. And that's something that I did not think would happen before the season. And man, 33 minutes later, right?
How could you think that before the season? The dude played 5 minutes a game last year, and now, and 2 of his first 3 games of the season have gone against the 2 front runners, not some of the front runners, the front runners for National Player of the Year. Drew Timme, Oscar Tshiebwe, and look. Both those guys had good games against Michigan State. That is a valid point. It's not like they struggled. Tshiebwe came off the bench and nearly put up 20-20 today because the man is an absolute monster, and that's what he does. Drew Timme, I think, was responsible for Gonzaga's final 18 points in that game. So, yeah, those 2 guys are going to do what those 2 guys do. That's why they're on this list. That's why they're in that conversation. But Mady Sissoko, in those 2 games, 15 points, 8.5 rebounds per game. Not total, per game. He averaged 15 and 8.5. He shot 9 of 15 from the field. That is 60% from the field for Mady Sissoko against Drew Timme and Oscar Tshiebwe. Yes, those guys are not known necessarily as defensive players, although Tshiebwe is pretty good on that end of the floor. Regardless, for him to come in and do that, Tom Izzo spoke at length in the offseason. He's had his issues with the transfer portal. He's made his opinion fairly clear. There was some criticism of this program of, hey, why didn't they add some front court depth via the transfer portal? Maybe Tom Izzo knew something that we didn't, huh?
I know, right? And I was definitely one of those people that were crying that get your you-know-what in the transfer portal. And look, there were moments in this game where, I was sitting on my couch, clenching the remote, just wondering, what, you get anything in the portal? Because Sissoko was out with 3 fouls very early in the second half. And then, you have Carson Cooper, who played on IMG's B team last year, fighting for his life now against Oscar Tshiebwe. Or you have Jackson Kohler, who was a more highly regarded recruit, top 60 recruit, but he was top 60 and not top 20 because, his defense kind of lacks and everything like that. So, but hey, you survived this game. So now we can talk about how great Mady Sissoko is. But yes, like there will still be nerves going later into the season. What if Mady gets into foul trouble early? You got to rely on these 2 freshmen in the front court. But hey, you know what? On this Tuesday night after beating number 4 Kentucky, we focus on the positives here in Michigan State. So that is 100% a massive positive. And, I need you to check me right here. That didn't really seem like that big of a fluke upset, if you will, too. And I know we talked about it. Michigan State is potentially a top 15 team, but that's what delighted me the most about this. Is
not a fluke at all. No,
it looked like they belonged. It was great. It was
absolutely.
awesome.
And I think there was some conversation about is Severe Wheeler going to play? He'd been dealing with some injuries. Sure. Is he going to be 100%? Tshiebwe, is he going to be 100%? Both those guys came off the bench. Look, they did not look like they were not 100%. They feel good. Calipari didn't say that after the game. That was not an excuse anybody used, and it shouldn't have been because they were the 2 best players on the floor for Kentucky. Obviously, the Wildcats have some gelling that they need to do. They got a tough matchup coming up against the Zags on the 20th. But at the end of the day, Michigan State did not look like a okay team that got lucky and beat a good team. They looked like a darn good team that had beat one good team and came really close to beating another good team.
What a start to the season. Yeah, and this defies any of the expectations I had. I mean, because I was thinking, you'll go 1-2 going into this Friday's game at home against Villanova. Could very well lose that, become 1-3, and then, oh my God, you start to spiral. It's like peak 85 could be a disaster, but I don't know when I'll learn. I've only been a fan of this team for my entire life, and Izzo's been the head coach that entire time too. I don't know when I'm going to learn to stop just doubting him going into a season. When am I going to just start trusting this Hall of Fame coach that I've known for the better part of almost 3 decades? I don't know. Maybe it'll be next year. Who's to say? Because Tom has had the boys playing tonight. And man.
Well, part 2 of the Champions Classic may not have been quite as exciting as part 1, but it was still an outstanding game with a couple of diaper dandies showing out in a big way down the stretch for both Kansas and Duke. More on that soon. But before we get there, I want to tell you all about today's sponsor, LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people to hire for your team faster and for free. It's extremely simple to use. Start by adding your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Well, the first game of the Champions Classic was an instant classic between Michigan State and Kentucky. Not quite as exciting of a game in the second half between Duke and Kansas. We still saw two really good teams go at it. Kansas pulled out a 69-64 victory. Isaac, the main thing I want to talk about here, though, in this game, these are two potential top 10 teams, borderline top 5 teams. Kansas likely going to sneak into the top 5 after this. And they could not shoot the ball at all. Do you remember when Gonzaga and Michigan State last week played on an aircraft carrier, a game everybody and their mom knew would be a poor shooting game? Those two teams combined to shoot 7 for 34 from deep. That's 20.5%. We're not pretending that's good, but guess what? On what ostensibly looked like the normal basketball court to me, yes, maybe it was a little bit slippery, but I don't know why. We just saw Duke and Kansas combined to shoot 6 for 40, 15% from deep. It's a nice win from Kansas, but what do you think about these two potential top 10, again, top 5 caliber teams doing that poorly from beyond the arc in this one?
Well, I tell you, I thought Mike Krzyzewski and Bill Self both coached great games in this one. And no, wait a second. Neither of them are on the sideline anymore. And I think that's the biggest thing right out of the gate. It's so weird to see Kansas and Duke playing and not have Coach K or Bill Self on the sideline. We have John Shire and we have Norm Roberts, longtime assistant. And, just it's a sign of the times, right? Yeah. There's no Jay Wright. There's no Roy Williams. Yeah. We know that Bill Self will be back very soon, but it's just, first off, that's the thing for me. It was just an odd spectacle to not see either of those guys. But here's the truth about the three-point shooting. If Kansas is going to go 3 of 19 from deep and still knock off Duke, I have massively undervalued the Jayhawks this season. When I look at like the finishing 5 on the court, to me, that has the makings of a unit that could potentially repeat as national champions. Yep. I absolutely love Grady Dick. I cannot get enough. I'll stop short of saying I can't get enough of that. But you hear my point. Like, this kid does not look like a freshman to me. No. He's got so much poise. He's got so much swagger and moxie. And it had like several really impressive athletic buckets in the first half, but didn't score in the second half until the final 2 minutes. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, boom, boom, boom. He has these 3 straight buckets with a Jeremy Roach 3 mixed in that gives Kansas a lead. They'll never relinquish. If you got a freshman shutting down a game like that, you're in good hands. But then you got your defensive stopper in Kevin McCullers, who transferred in from Texas Tech. You've got who I think is a guard that is not being talked about enough on the national level, in Mr. DeJuan Harris, dropping 10 dimes in this game. And then Jalen Wilson, who brings it all together as the best, the best player that Kansas has to rely on. If they're going to go back to those same heights as last year, he's got to be the dude to do it.
Jalen Wilson was incredible in this game, and Grady Dick, like you mentioned, had a really monstrous couple of minutes towards the end of the game. I echo the points about Kevin McCullar, but for me, one of the big concerns for Kansas is they had 4 points coming off their bench. 4. That is it. I think that will come up as the season goes on. I think obviously you're going to rely more on your starters and your star players in games like this. That's standard for basically every team that plays in games like this. But guess what? Kansas is in the Big 12. They got a lot of games like this. They got a whole lot of games that are going to be tough wire-to-wire matchups. And for me, if we don't see their bench step up and be more of a contributor, if they're relying really heavily on Wilson to score, a third or more of their points like he did in this one, that to me is going to be an issue. I think that this is a really nice win for Kansas. Clearly, anytime you can knock off Duke, anytime you can knock off a top 10 team, you got to feel really good about it. But while I think Kansas winning this game while shooting really poorly is a pretty tremendous accomplishment and something that they should be really happy about, I think you can see some holes. You can see some reasons that they might have 3 or 4 guys that put together could give them a finishing lineup that's going to win a lot of games in the NCAA tournament. But to get there, to get to that top seed and to not get picked off early, you got to have that depth. And right now, I need to see it from them first.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see Mr. MJ Rice get on the court, another heralded freshman who has had a little bit of some injury stuff. I think that'll help that depth come together more. But you're right. Right now, it is anemic, similar to some other top teams we've seen around the nation right now. I think of North Carolina, who is struggling with their bench depth right now as well. But as for the Duke of it all, better days are ahead, right? Now, as you said, like anytime a team can knock off Duke, that's a big deal. Duke has coming into this event has the best record in the Champions Classic of the 4 teams. But last night, they take an L. And I think when you rely so heavily on freshmen, when you have a first-year coach in John Shire, you're going to take lumps like this. Duke is phenomenally talented. But they're going to lose multiple games this season. We're going to talk more about the ACC in just a second and how atrocious it is. So they'll probably handle conference play pretty well there. But I know Dariq Whitehead is still out injured. We haven't seen him at all. Derek Lively coming off the bench. And so for me, the freshman that has been most impressive so far is Kyle Filipowski. This dude is a legit 7-footer. He's out running the break. He's pulling up, hitting threes, and getting double doubles every single time out. I am highly impressed with what Kyle Filipowski is bringing to Duke so far. What did you think of his performance, Andy?
Kyle Phillip, I watched every Gonzaga basketball game for years now, and I'm not going to toss out Chet Holmgren comps all that likely or all that often. And there are certainly some differences in their games, but watching this, big 7-foot guy who can lead the break, who can step back, pull up threes, do that kind of stuff. He's also tenacious around the rim. I think when we talk about, really big players who can shoot from the outside, we often don't. It's rare for them to also be really good defensively. That's what made Chet Holmgren so unique. That's what I think was a big part of Kyle Filipowski in his game. You saw Kansas try to go with their small ball lineups and really try to attack Duke that way by spacing the floor. And what Duke did is they basically packed it in, and they let Filipowski, they let the other freshman, Derek Lively. He kind of just packed it in. He had 4 offensive rebounds in this game. He didn't have a great performance otherwise, but he was able to get on the offensive glass and get some putbacks that way. Filipowski finished with 14 rebounds. He becomes the first Duke freshman ever to get double doubles in his first 3 games.
Zion didn't
do this. Zion didn't do this.
Come on.
Grant Hill, Christian Laettner, Jahlil Okafor, none of these guys 3 straight games to start their career with a double-double. Kyle Filipowski is the only one to do it. That includes a win over Kansas, a very, very good squad. I'm really impressed with what we've seen out of him. But again, like you said, if you rely too much on freshmen, even if one has a great game like this, if the other guys don't really step up, and in this case, obviously Whitehead wasn't playing, that is very clearly a factor here, but you didn't get a ton from Lively. Jeremy Roach had a pretty Jeremy Roachy game. He had 16 points, but 17 field goal attempts. You need more. And you know that this is a risk with freshmen. You know that it's a risk with a new head coach. And there's no shame in losing a close game to a really good Kansas team when you're not at full strength, but it's still a tough pill to swallow.
Absolutely it is, especially because we think it's going to be the freshmen that are going to be the ones to struggle. Well, down the stretch, to me, Kansas controlled the first half. Duke controlled 17 and a half minutes of the second half.
Right.
And then Grady Dick went on that run, but then it's a freshman throwing the ball away. And you think, that's a freshman mistake for Duke. Yeah. But then Duke has a chance to potentially take a lead back. It was Jeremy Roach was the one with an offensive foul that gave the ball back to Kansas. And just ultimately at that point, you got nothing left. And so interesting that on this team where we're going to point fingers at the freshmen a lot this season, it was Jeremy Roach that cost them one of those chances last night.
Well, Isaac, Duke's loss is far from the only tough result for the ACC so far this season, or even for the ACC just yesterday. Before we get into that, though, I want to tell you all about BetOnline. College basketball is just now getting started. College football and the NFL, of course, in the thick of their seasons. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports information, from all the latest odds, contests, and player props, you name it. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your latest sports developments, including podcasts and reviews for all of the leagues this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. They even have lines for coaching changes across every major sport, so even in the offseason, you can get your fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Isaac, we got to talk ACC basketball right now. I think there's a lot of conferences that we've seen have some pretty horrific struggles to begin the season. The Pac-12, my goodness, they are in a dark place from a basketball perspective right now. Frankly, from a football perspective, too. It's been a rough week for the Pac-12. It just has. But we're going to stick with the ACC because, oh boy, it's been a rough one. We know Duke lost. Obviously, that's a tough loss for them, but Duke's going to be fine. They're going to bounce back. North Carolina, been a bit of a rocky start to the year in terms of some closer results than you'd like to see, but you know what? North Carolina is probably going to be fine. After that, and especially towards the bottom of the conference, it can get nasty. I mean, it's really, really ugly what's going down at the bottom half of the ACC. We've seen Syracuse lost to Colgate. That was an ugly one. Florida State still doesn't have a win. Boston College lost a game to Maine. Wake Forest just barely defeated Utah Valley during the same time as the Champions Classic games. That was almost another bad loss for the ACC. But then there's Louisville. And it's hard to not talk about Louisville. We were saying before, we knew that Louisville was going to be bad. It's not like the expectations for Louisville were super high. So it's hard to know, like, are they the most disappointing team in the ACC? Would you give that to a team like Florida State, who was less likely to be 0-3 at this point? Or do you look at a team like Louisville, who is the first team in 40 years to lose their first 3 games of the season by 1 point? Devastating trio of losses for Kenny Payne. Really rough start to the season, not just for the Cardinal, but for the ACC as a whole.
Yeah, it's a great question, Andy. For me, Florida State, a lot of their issue right now is more about they've got multiple injuries. They've got a player suspended. I think Florida State's start, well, you still should win game. Like their first game of the season, they had 8 scholarship players available.
Right.
When you're dealing with that, it's just hard. And I know, the schools you're looking at are Stetson and Central Florida and Troy. And you think, you should at least win 2 of those, maybe even shorthanded, but I can see it and I can understand it. And so with Louisville, oh man. And first off, before we even talk about it, this game against App State last night, you think, oh man, we've been losing, but we've made a comeback. It's very similar. They did that against Bellarmine. They were down to Bellarmine in their first game, almost came back, but just too little, too late. However, in this game, L. Ellis, one of Louisville's guards, just a little guy causing issues, comes in. Louisville's down 1, gets this layup at the buzzer, and you think, oh, praise Jesus, Louisville is off the schneid. They've got to win. No. Upon review, the ball was still on his fingertips right as the buzzer turned red. And so there you go. Louisville is now 0-3. For Kenny Payne, it is a miserable start. I'm not worried about his job security because with everything Louisville's going through with the sanctions weren't as bad as we expected, but with the sanctions and other stuff, there's going to be grace and patience there. But my word, a program as proud as Louisville cannot have this. And so there will have to be changes to turn Louisville's season around. Not to mention they just lost DJ Wagner to Kentucky in recruiting. And so, man, So yes, I expected Louisville to be bad, but bottom of the barrel bad like this? No. I cannot wait to see what happens to them in ACC play. I mean, goodness gracious, it's going to be bad. But as for the rest of the ACC, here's a dirty little secret, Andy. Ever since the ACC poached all those Big East teams a couple years ago, it has not been the same conference.
Yeah.
It diluted the whole product. When the ACC was 9 teams, it's kind of like what the Big 12 is now, is what I always compare that to. And so you add in teams like Syracuse, who's been this middling team that, because of their zone, they'll make some noise in March or whatever. But Boston College is just a perennial bottom feeder.
Yeah.
So you just aren't going to have the same level that you did with bringing all those teams in. And so I think that's part of the ACC's struggle. And then even at the top of the ACC, as you mentioned, North Carolina struggling. And big picture for me, this even goes beyond the ACC to saying, Andy, I don't know that I've really been, outside of Houston, I've not really been impressed with any of the top 10 teams. Where are you at on that? Are you seeing the same thing I'm seeing?
Yeah, Houston has been very impressive. Marcus Sasser is a star. They got some really talented young freshmen on that team who are playing really well right now. They haven't really played anybody yet, and unfortunately, one of their kind of big games. I feel for mid-major teams, and I know that they're very soon to not be a mid-major team, but I feel for these programs when they schedule high major Power 5 programs, because they usually do it a year or two in advance, and you only get a couple a year that are willing to play you. And they snagged Oregon, and that's a nice game for them most seasons. And to start this season, that looks like a really nice game for them. But now Oregon's not very good. Like like the rest of the Pac-12, they're not in a good place right now. They suffered a really ugly loss to UC Irvine. Like, this is a pretty rough team. And now they're in a position where Houston's probably going to come in and they're probably going to beat them pretty badly. And if they do, it's going to help. Don't get me wrong. It's going to help. It's going to help solidify their case for potentially being number 2 or number 1, particularly if Gonzaga falls to Kentucky, which is very possible. But it sucks to only have a couple of really high-profile games on your schedule and have them just not pan out and be as exciting a games as you're hoping for. But for me, like, Houston is playing better than just about anybody in the country right now. I think Gonzaga is a little bit harder to judge because they have had one high marquee opponent and they didn't look very good in that game. But some of that is kind of due to the circumstances. And ultimately, at the end of the day, they did win the game. Right. We are going to learn a lot more about Gonzaga
on Sunday.
Yep. Well, we're going to learn a lot about them on Sunday. We're going to learn more about them on Wednesdays too. They got Texas at Texas. That's going to be a tricky one too. So we'll learn more about them. Certainly North Carolina and many other teams are going to start to see their schedule pick up as we get into the MTEs and Feast Week and everything that happens there. But right now, we've seen more bad basketball than good basketball. And at the top, Houston's great. Creighton has been struggling. Baylor has looked good, but has also, shown some warts as well. So I don't think that the top 5 or top 10 is really in any way solidified. And we could see lots and lots of movements in the coming weeks.
Like Michigan State, put that team straight into the top 10.
Yes, absolutely. Good. Michigan State, if they're not top 15, or at the they're going to be top 20 for sure. If they're not top 15, I don't know if I don't know if I could pick more than 8 teams that I would conclusively right now put ahead of them. And of those 8 teams, one of them they lost to by 1 point because of a bad possession at the end of the game. And then, I don't know that you can put them behind Kentucky at this point. So if Kentucky drops, they're going to be right in that conversation. And it seems crazy for a Tom Izzo team that was, 35th, 40th, or whatever they were considered in KenPom before the season, got a few votes, don't really have a star player, but this team's going to be right in that conversation, and they deserve it because not a lot of those high profile teams have looked all that good to begin the season.
No, they haven't. And we're going to find out. I'm even looking to see. Yeah. At KenPom, it's already updated. Michigan State's up to 18 now.
Wow.
So even in the computer, it's picking up on what you and I are seeing with our eyeballs right out of the gate.
That is going to do it for us today here, Locked On College Basketball. So many more fun games coming up this week and this weekend. Don't forget to miss out on the show right here on any podcast platform. You can also find it on YouTube. Go hit that subscribe button if you haven't done it yet already. Thank you all for making Locked On College Basketball your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. All right. Thank you all for listening. Peace out.
Peace.